Hi friends! In early 2025, Washington rolled out a sweeping trade overhaul that rattled the foundations of global commerce. President Donald Trump introduced a blanket 10% tariff on all imports entering the United States, and an extraordinary 145% duty on goods arriving from China. The move, billed as a defense of American industry, jolted markets and disrupted supply chains that had been stable for decades. But before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We bring you the most urgent global updates, exclusive conflict insights, and accurate forecasts you won't find elsewhere. Amazon, responsible for roughly 2/5 of US online sales, was among the first to feel the shock. Within weeks, the company faced sharply rising import bills on everything from smartphones to home appliances. Internal projections suggested that absorbing these costs would be financially unsustainable, while passing them on risked alienating millions of price-sensitive shoppers. Instead, Amazon tore up more than $13 billion worth of existing supply chain agreements and restructured its procurement strategy almost overnight. The changes went far beyond tweaking supplier contracts. Shipments from Chinese factories slowed to a trickle as Amazon sought alternative production hubs in countries with lower costs and friendlier trade terms. Mexico, Vietnam, and India became central to its sourcing network, with new warehouses and distribution facilities opening at record pace. According to Bloomberg, Mexico alone saw a 35% increase in logistics infrastructure tied to Amazon's operations in 2025. But these adjustments came at a cost to the United States. Ports in Los Angeles and Long Beach, along the nation's busiest gateways for goods from Asia, reported double-digit drops in container traffic. Thousands of jobs tied to port activity, trucking, and warehousing evaporated as freight was rerouted through foreign hubs. A Port of Los Angeles study estimated that every 10% decline in container volume cut roughly 5,000 jobs in the surrounding community. In 2025, volumes fell by more than twice that figure. For the Trump administration, tariffs were a political statement as much as an economic tool. Officials argued that higher import taxes would pressure foreign competitors and revive domestic manufacturing. Economists, however, pointed to a different reality. While the policy made Chinese imports prohibitively expensive, it did little to bring production back to US soil. Instead, companies sidestepped the tariffs by shifting operations abroad. The retail industry's warnings underscore the unintended consequences. Walmart reported a 12% spike in procurement costs for everyday goods. Target faced shortages in electronics and home essentials, and Home Depot signaled potential gaps in tool and building material inventories. Even toy giant Mattel saw production delays and cost surges threatening holiday supply. Rising prices, often 10% to 20% higher for key consumer goods, have hit lower-income households hardest, with families trimming grocery lists, postponing purchases, or turning to cheaper alternatives. By mid-2026, analysts expect the cumulative effect of these shifts to permanently alter trade routes. Mexico's border cities are poised to surpass US ports as primary entry points for North American e-commerce, while Vietnam and India strengthen their positions as manufacturing powerhouses. The US, once a dominant force in shaping global supply chains, risks losing leverage in trade negotiations as companies deepen ties with alternative partners. Amazon's rapid pivot illustrates both the resilience and the cold calculus of multinational corporations. By investing billions in overseas operations, the company has preserved its profit margins and delivery speed. But in doing so, it has accelerated a quiet retreat from the US economic model that once centered on domestic infrastructure. For port workers, truck drivers, and local businesses tied to America's old trade network, the tariffs have brought not a revival, but a reckoning. The question now is whether these policies will be remembered as a bold stand for American manufacturing, or as the spark that pushed its biggest players to plant their flags somewhere else. If current trends hold, by 2027, the United States may control a far smaller share of global trade, while cities in Mexico and factories in Southeast Asia reap the rewards of a global realignment born from a single policy gamble. Economists caution that the changes underway are not temporary adjustments, but the early stages of a structural transformation in how global trade functions. Once companies establish production lines, logistics contracts, and supplier relationships in new countries, they are unlikely to return, even if the tariffs are rolled back. Supply chains have a memory, noted Dr. Lena Cruz, a trade policy analyst at the Brookings Institution. Once a company has invested millions in a distribution hub in Mexico or manufacturing in Vietnam, they have no incentive to undo those changes unless the economics shift dramatically. This permanence poses a long-term challenge for American workers. The manufacturing revival promised in 2016 and reiterated in 2025 has not materialized at scale. Instead, job growth is happening in Monterrey, Ho Chi Minh City, and Bangalore, not Detroit, Cleveland, or Pittsburgh. While some industries, such as steel and aluminum, have seen modest domestic gains, the overall employment impact has been offset by losses in logistics, retail, and import-dependent sectors. Politically, the fallout is complicated. Trump's base may applaud the tough stance against China, but the ripple effects are hitting Republican and Democratic strongholds alike. States with major ports, from California to Georgia, are reporting declines in shipping volume and associated revenue. Agricultural states are also feeling pressure as retaliatory tariffs from China and other countries make US farm exports less competitive abroad. Geopolitically, the vacuum left by shifting US trade routes is being filled quickly. Mexico's deepening role in North American logistics is cementing its economic integration with Asian suppliers, making it a bridge between East and West in ways Washington may not control. Vietnam and India are leveraging their positions to attract not just manufacturing but technology and infrastructure investments from Europe, Japan, and the Gulf states. The long-term effect could be a rebalancing of global economic influence away from Washington. A slow erosion of the trade dominance the US has enjoyed since World War II. For Amazon, this transformation is less about politics than survival. The company's model depends on speed, efficiency, and scale. The tariff era has forced it to re-engineer those pillars in real time. In internal strategy meetings, executives are reportedly planning further investments in artificial intelligence-driven supply chain optimization, along with expanded robotics in new facilities abroad. These moves will make the network leaner, but also less dependent on US-based labor. The irony, trade analysts note, is that the tariffs intended to safeguard American jobs may be hastening the offshoring of not only manufacturing, but also the higher value logistics and operational roles that underpin the modern e-commerce economy. As Professor James Holloway of the London School of Economics put it, protectionism has become a boomerang. It's being thrown at rivals abroad, but it's circling back to strike the very economy it was meant to protect. By 2028, if the current trajectory holds, America's share of global import traffic could fall below 10% for the first time in over half a century. The country would still be a major consumer market, but increasingly a customer, not a controller, of the supply chains that feed it. For companies like Amazon, Walmart, and Target, the strategy is clear. Follow the most efficient path wherever it leads. For Washington, the question is whether the trade tools of the past can still shape a world where commerce no longer revolves around the United States. By 2030, the full consequences of the tariff-driven realignment are impossible to ignore. The ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, once the beating heart of America's Pacific trade, operate at less than half their former capacity. Rows of idle cranes line the waterfront, and entire container yards stand empty, reclaimed by weeds. Many of the dock workers who once worked double shifts now commute to service jobs miles inland, while others have left California entirely, chasing opportunities in growing logistics hubs abroad. Mexico's transformation is perhaps the most striking. Cities like Monterrey and Guadalajara have evolved from regional manufacturing centers into global distribution powerhouses, linking Asian factories to North American consumers without ever touching US soil. New freight rail lines and high-speed cargo routes connect Mexico's ports on both coasts to inland mega hubs, where automated sorting facilities process millions of packages daily. The country's share of North American e-commerce logistics has more than doubled since 2025, and foreign investment has surged to record levels. Vietnam's rise is equally dramatic. Once seen primarily as a low-cost garment producer, it now boasts a diversified export portfolio, including electronics, pharmaceuticals, and precision machinery. Deepwater ports in Haiphong and Ho Chi Minh City bustle with container traffic, much of it bypassing US routes entirely in favor of direct connections to Europe, Australia, and emerging African markets. Meanwhile, India has positioned itself as a global back office and manufacturing alternative to China, integrating advanced technology into its export sectors and securing favorable trade terms with a coalition of nations spanning Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. In Washington, policymakers struggle to adapt to the new order. The blunt instrument of tariffs, once seen as a show of strength, has yielded mixed results. While some US-based industries, notably defense manufacturing and certain niche technologies, have seen localized gains, the broader economy has grown more dependent on imports from countries not subject to punitive tariffs. This dependence creates new vulnerabilities, currency fluctuations, political instability in partner nations, and the growing leverage of foreign governments over American supply chains. Politically, the reshaped trade landscape has altered voting patterns. Port cities hit by economic decline have seen rising populist movements demanding either a repeal of the tariffs or even more radical protectionist measures. Inland regions tied to agriculture or manufacturing are split, some benefiting from limited reshoring, others suffering from lost export markets. The national debate over trade is no longer a simple question of free trade versus protectionism, but a complex reckoning with the realities of a multipolar global economy. For Amazon and its peers, the shift has been a lesson in flexibility. By 2030, less than 25% of the company's supply chain volume passes through US entry points. Instead, goods flow from regional manufacturing hubs directly to localized fulfillment centers in Mexico, Canada, and even the Caribbean, with final delivery into the US handled by cross-border trucking and regional courier networks. This model insulates the company from sudden changes in US trade policy, but it also erodes the influence of American labor and infrastructure over the flow of global commerce. If you want to stay ahead of the curve with real-time updates, in-depth analysis, and expert insights on global flashpoints like this one, make sure to subscribe. This is just the beginning.